Hi, this is Mindrolling, and I am back, and I'm back with my sometime podcast partner, once in a blue moon, Jared Gagan Levy. Welcome.
Good to
Nice
be
to
back,
see
my
you.
brother. Good to be
Yeah.
back.
And we're here with a new friend, Scott Kriens. Scott started this absolutely extraordinary multiversity, he calls it, called 1440. Many of you know about it already because they're a partner of ours at Be Here Now Network. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Raghu. Nice to be here with you both.
Yeah, it's great. So right off the bat, though, we want to, just get a feel for how you came all the way to creating this jewel, which is near Santa Cruz. Just talk a little bit, just so we can get to know you a little bit about just how you got into the transformation business, but more um, how did you in your own personal transformation, and I know you went into the tech world and so on, and we want to hear about that. But we'd also like to hear the moment, sort of, that, or moments, when you got the idea that there was a way to be happy and free and not caught in mind and ego and so on. So what led up into that moment, which probably precipitated a lot of what you're doing now?
Well, Raghu, I'd like to report that I've discovered the way to be happy and free and not caught up in ego. But I can only claim the journey. And I can tell you when it started to the day, actually, because it was January 6th of 2004. And that was the day that I lost my father.
Hmm.
And I was sitting with him after he had passed. And the question of what matters came up for me in a way that it hadn't before, and in a way that wouldn't and hasn't and won't go away. I think I'll just speak for myself, but I'm probably not alone. I think all of us have at different times in our lives had questions of meaning and purpose and life come up. And at least in my case, it's been easier to push it out of the way and get on with whatever the urgencies of the day were. And on that day, it wasn't available to be pushed away any longer. So, I don't claim that I've found the answers to the question. I've discovered a lot of things I was doing that don't matter. And 1440 and Multiversity is about the pursuit of what does.
Yeah.
For me and hopefully for others.
But before that moment, I'm sure you had other moments, though, that you went, gee, wonder what is the underlying reality here in some way, in some fashion. No?
Yeah, I did. It would come up periodically. And I would say, really tough question, and I need to get this college degree. So I'll just focus on that instead. Because whatever does matter, I'll be better off educated. And then it was, I'll need a job, and I'd like to have a house to live in, and it would be nice to start a family. And so there was a reason to talk about something else every time the hard question came up.
Right.
Until that day, by which time, 45 years of my life had passed. And I still had never really stared at the question. So it was overdue.
Well, never overdue. The timing's always perfect, isn't it? For all of us.
Yeah, it's better to say that because time only goes one direction so
Yeah.
far as I can tell.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things so just so people do know that you were involved in the tech world and an entrepreneur, and most recently you were the CEO of Juniper Networks, which you're still involved with, I understand.
Yeah, I became CEO there in 1996, and I was CEO for 12 years, and we created a $4 billion company. And I was chairman at that time, and I have remained chairman since. So that's now 22 years of chairmanship. And I spent 12 years as the sitting CEO as well.
Hmm. Which must have been an extraordinary experience in terms of being right in the middle of all of that as it's been happening over these last 20 years or so. So I'm sure that was an education in and of itself.
It was a lot of on-the-job training. And we still are. If you ever wondered when you put your email address in and hit send, and magically something's keeping track of about 9 billion of them in the world and making sure yours goes where it should and so forth. That's what we do. We're in the middle of the infrastructure that keeps track of where everything is and how to get it there. We don't look at what's inside. So we're not the people
right.
Interrogating any of the content. But if you wondered how the backbone of it works and who keeps track of where everybody is, that's what Juniper does.
Extraordinary.
I'm so curious. So being in the tech world during that time, a little bit of stress, a couple times in there, and 99, 2000, and then around 2008. I'm really curious. I mean, this mindfulness wave that has taken, Silicon Valley, which is, however it's a beautiful thing that it's entering, right, the tech world in a big way. But I'm just wondering, it sounds like you had a journey even up until that point with your father. Were you starting to kind of try to integrate mindfulness practices or any other sorts of kind of reflective practices internally at Juniper before, this big, epiphany that you had and moving towards 1440?
I was, Jared, not at the outset in the 90s, but after a couple of things happened. One was losing my father, but also the company had gotten to a point where, we had several thousand people in offices all over the world. And as the CEO, as the leader of the company, the question became, what do I do now? Because just walking around with my own two hands trying to make a difference with that many billions of dollars and thousands of people and all that stuff, it wasn't really the way to do it. And so what became the belief that I still have is what you have to do is develop the leaders who are at the point of impact all around an organization. And then what's true about that is that nobody cares what you know until they know who you are. And nobody cares what you say until they know that you care. And so showing up as who you are and caring about that and being willing to be out there, which is a form of being mindful and being present, being with people instead of at people, is really that work in leadership development was my path to reflection and contemplation and meditation and so forth, because it's not possible to show up as who you are if you don't know. And you can't know if you don't ask, and you can't ask if you don't contemplate that in some way. So kind of as will probably sound familiar, the path presented itself, but to me, it actually went through the road of leadership development.
Oh, that's great. Wish there was more of you out there these days.
There's more all the time,
There is, yeah. Well, and we've met some of them through one of the people involved in Love, Serve, Remember is a woman named Mirabai Bush, and she does work. Yeah, and you know Mirabai, and she does work in those spheres and reports back, yes, there are a lot more very conscious leaders coming through the pike than there has been.
Yeah, I'll give you a theory with no proof, but it feels correct to me. I actually think the uprising of social media and the uprising of mindfulness are directly related, because what social media, and I'll just use that term to mean a lot of things, but what the behaviors that we now see online in stark form that used to live in dark corners are all the same behaviors that have been going on offline forever, but now they're right in our face. And so the need to figure out how to be a little more mindful and a little more compassionate has never been made more visible than in the last 10 years or 15 years, when we've seen these terrible behaviors often showing up online, because that's how people sometimes behave. And I think the response to that is we need to learn how to be in better relationship, and we need to learn how to have compassion for one another, and we need to be a little more present, a little more mindful, because I don't want to look like what I'm seeing online in some cases. So I think the rise of mindfulness, which actually corresponds pretty much directly on top of the rise of online and social media and relationships on display for everyone to see, is a kind of a equal and opposite reaction to some of the bad behavior that the online world kind of illuminates for us.
It's interesting, right? Like these different trends that come about. It's, you see this kind of first it's talking about it, the social cred of mindfulness, right? Like, oh, I meditate in the morning. I, listen to this, podcast or that, and you're sharing it through social. You just did this, or at your next cocktail party. And then, so you kind of got this like fake it till you make it, moment
I'm mindful.
Right. Yeah. And I'm getting cred for that. Like my group of friends, thinks of me a little higher in that way. And then you actually do sit, right? You do a meditation, and then it does something like inside, you get a little spark, and then you realize, wow, there might be something to this, and then all of a sudden you're on this road, on the path. And it's really interesting because I've seen the same thing. And there's been a similar rise with like social responsible business, and corporate social responsibility and green business. At first, it was kind of like, let's put a sustainability officer on there, or let's give a little money back over here, 5 cents over here, but talk about it with $1 over here. And then companies started realizing, wow, like their consumers are actually having values alignment with this message I'm putting out. So maybe this is something we should look at. And then they, things like B Corp, come out, and companies are committing to it and realizing, wow, this is actually the long-term strategy for the health of my company, from a profitability standpoint as well. So it's really interesting because I love to toggle between our own personal growth and looking at businesses as humans as well in their own right, and the growth of them, and mindfulness and social responsibility and this kind of stuff. But I hadn't thought about it that way until you kind of talked about the rise of social media and mindfulness and connected that.
Yeah, I love that.
Something else interesting I will tell you that surprised me a little bit is we started Multiversity here thinking a lot of it was going to be built around workshops for individuals, and people would self-select in, more so than it would be for groups and corporations. And instead, what's happened, I mean, that is happening, of course, because Mirabai and Sharon Salzberg and Jack Kornfield and lots of other people have been here and doing exactly that. But the surprising thing is, so have a lot of corporations. And when they contact, because we haven't done any promotion to that at all, there's people that have contacted us and said, can we bring our group there? And we've said, maybe, but not if you're here to talk about budgets and products and engineering, because that's not what we do. We have a mission, and actually 75-80% of the companies have said, actually, that's not what we want to come for. We want to come for practices in authentic leadership, in mindfulness, in conscious communication practices, team building. We want, that's the reason we want to come to you, is we want to do that work. Sometimes they say, we've got our own instructors. Sometimes they've said, can you teach? And sometimes, a bit of both. We're here to do a little bit of our own, and we'd love to be exposed to meditation and other programs you could recommend for us. But that's probably 80% of the companies that have come through here. And when they've contacted us, 80% have said, no, that I don't want to do a product meeting. I'll do that in my office. I'm coming for another purpose. So I do think there's something afoot that's more than just, to your point, Jared, it's not just, I want the credit of saying I do that stuff. It's really going on.
Right. I want to go back to the our chat about and how you brought up social media happening at the same time as the mindful, everything kind of coming and blooming at that time. And you have also said, Scott, the blazing success of the internet catalyzed powerful connections, yet did not help people connect to themselves. And that's an interesting statement. And we have had dialogue on what I've done over the last couple of years with Mindrolling that has come up very often. What is the efficacy of the net in terms of how powerful it is in the connectivity that we have with each other, and at the same time, the downside, which is huge. There's a lot of downside, and as you just said, it's really coming up and flashing in our faces these days in a very difficult way. But I think it's a real question, the balancing act of good and bad.
Yeah, but let me say this about that, Raghu. I think, first of all, I think it's the most powerful innovation in the history of mankind, is the capability to connect every person on the planet. Nothing we've ever invented has had more power potential than that. Now, when you invent something that powerful with primitive understanding of its power, it's inevitable that it's going to be used in imperfect ways, because life is imperfect and we don't know everything that we need to know. It still makes sense to invent it. The first thing that happened when man invented fire was he burned down the whole village. It didn't make fire a bad idea. And we've now got this incredibly potent invention, and we need to learn into how to use it. But as I said earlier, I don't think anything's happening online that wasn't happening offline. It might be more visible, might horrify us in ways that it didn't when it was out of our consciousness. But that didn't mean bullying and abuse and pick any of the ailments of being online weren't already happening, and probably in at least as painful a way in many cases offline, because it went on unchecked, right? So, that doesn't mean we just let it go on. There's a lot of effort to figure out, well, now how do we use this tool for betterment and for good? And what are the things we need to be careful of now that we are beginning to understand the power of what's been created and so forth? Incredibly important conversations. But I personally, I'll just say for myself, that I couldn't be more optimistic or more excited about what we built. And I'm sad for the casualties, not to be unsympathetic to some of the consequences, but we're an imperfect species. And on balance, we're way better off.
Opinion. Come on. Speak for yourself, Scott.
My opinion.
No. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's fantastic right now. I mean, I won't go off on a whole tangent on what's happening with, blockchains right now and things like that. But as an underlying principle of democratizing power, I think that we're just seeing the beginning, right, of the power of the internet to be able to do that. I mean, I feel like we're at a moment with when there's conversation around influence and power and money, where it's like the end of a Monopoly game. And we're pretty soon what do you do at the end of a Monopoly game? You clear and you start over, with new currency. And I truly, I was talking to a guy yesterday about this that has a crypto called democracy.Earth, which is, really, really devoted to using blockchains to give us, each a vote in the world. We're truly bringing about democracy using the blockchain, and looking, at as real ways to manifest, universal basic income for every human being on the planet. I mean, so I just, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I really, really love how the places where the internet is being leaned into in a healthy way. And as with everything, there's going to be some bad practices that we need to kind of work through,
Right.
Actually, you don't know this, but one of we have a very dear friend in common who's departed us, unfortunately, but we worked on the strategy for digital detox with Levi Felix.
Yes.
And I know that you all at 1440 supported him.
Yes, we did.
And still, I should say his organization is still going, but that whole trend and conversation that he brought to the world around digital detox and how to look, technology isn't going away, but how to have healthier relationships with social media and technology and integrate it into your life in a way to help bring more connection, as you said, is really a beautiful thing. And other movements you're seeing like that sprout up.
Yeah, and 1440, along with running the Multiversity here, also has an investment arm and has invested in a number of technologies, quantifiable self technologies, apps for meditation. If you use Insight Timer, for example, which is one of the more visible ones, or Headspace or things like that, those are all 1440 investments. Because I think that it is possible in a purposeful way to take this connectivity capability that we have and launch a whole series of invitations to get to know yourself better. And the comment that you referenced, or the quote earlier, Raghu, that I made, was the thing about the internet or about this connectivity is it does give us this capability to connect to everybody else. But now people get so preoccupied with how they show up for everybody else and how they look online and what their Facebook page says and all that stuff. We didn't used to pay a lot of attention to ourselves or spend a lot of time with ourselves, because when we got that moment, we'd run to the TV and turn it on or whatever. Now we go online, but it's odd, or both at the same time. I guess if you're like kids today, in many cases, they got three things going on at the same time. But to have a relationship with somebody, you've got to spend time with them. And the odd thing is, the person most of us often spend the least amount of time with is ourselves. Real quality time. We're awake, but we're paying attention to something or somebody else. And in some ways, the internet has, or call it social media, whatever you want to say about it, we get so preoccupied with showing up for others that we spend even less time with this person we already don't know that well, which is us.
Yeah.
And so there's some work to do here. I don't mean to say there isn't, but I also think the awareness is going up.
Yeah. You know what, Annie Lamott? You got to have Annie Lamott over there at 1440, Scott. I don't know. Yeah. You find out. She lives in Marin nearby Jared there, and Annie is a writer, and it's just one of the most insightful writers that I know, and a good friend of Jack Kornfield. And she said, my mind is a bad neighborhood. Something like, I think I need a chaperone to really go there. So yeah, let's talk about who helped chaperone you a little bit into getting more awareness, getting on the path and growing. And I know authenticity is certainly a byword for all of us. But talk about your own journey there.
Well, as I said, it had a lot to do in the early days with leadership, and authentic leadership was something taught by a guy named Bill George, who was the CEO of Medtronic for a lot of years. It was a very large healthcare company. And then he wrote a book called True North, and he began teaching at Harvard, and is one of the kind of loud voices early on, this is many years ago, on the subject of authenticity and authentic leadership. And then on the personal side of it all, it's been kind of a windy road. It's been time with, in the early days, for me, early, I'm meaning post 2004, with some training in Buddhism with a Buddhist monk that I crossed paths with, and have spent some time in trainings with John Kabat-Zinn and a little bit with Jack, and also some time with TM, a guy named Laurent Villasek, and some of the TM trainings there. But, I think, I have another theory with no proof. I have lots of those. And this one is that I think sometimes it's not so much the training technique, it's the time in your life that it crosses your path, and your readiness for it. And I think sometimes we tend to think, that it's, whether it's Buddhism or Christianity or Sufism or whatever, that, oh my gosh, it's the teaching. And I don't mean to be disrespectful at all to any of the teachings, but I also think it has a whole lot to do with where a person is in their journey when whatever it is crosses their path. And for me, at different times, different levels of readiness, I suppose, it's as someone said, it's the one truth known by many names. And I think that inward inquiry and the quiet and the contemplative reflection, if you want to call it that, whether some people might call it meditation or others would call it prayer. And I kind of prefer not to create a great big stark distinction and try and grade one or the other. I just think it's back to that prioritizing that relationship that we have with ourselves and spending some time with that stranger. That's Derek Walcott's poem, is the stranger who's known you your whole life. Get to know that guy.
Yeah.
However you choose to do it.
It's so, I love what you just said there, because at this current time, this is why, I feel like multiversity is so needed right now, because, for years past, I mean, there were, humans were more drawn towards like, church or the religious, organized religion for this piece. And I feel like, especially, over the last 50 years in the West, with the influx of, Eastern philosophy into the West, on the backs of people like, Ram Dass and others, that a more secular approach to spirituality and a more inward approach, individual, spiritual path has really, come into being in a major way. Not that always hasn't been happening, but it seems, and what I really love about, when I saw 1440 was coming into existence and started looking at it, was just like all the modalities. It's kind of a buffet, of like different paths. So for me as a seeker, it's that, that whole all rivers lead to the ocean kind of piece, where it's like, oh, well, I'm in more of a, feeling in a bhakti path, this, I need to go do a workshop on, couples work with my wife, or tantra traditions, or, or leadership, because I'm having trouble with. So, I mean, I bring that about because when I first heard about 1440, it was kind of like, wow, that's, there's Esalen down there, and there's these other places, Kripalu, that are in my mind as kind of occupying a certain space. Then I started seeing the offerings, like and the first time I visited it was actually during the Conscious Company Media Forum that they held there with a lot of other conscious, business leaders. I have to say, I mean, I was just really pleasantly surprised by the way that you manifested that ability to have that buffet of modalities, all with authenticity in that space.
Well, I appreciate that, Jared. And it's really one of the reasons behind the name, actually, is Multiversity is got one of the reasons for that name is because we think of it as multiple doors into the same room. And I think people are, this is at the risk of a generalization, people are motivated by two things: desire or pain. And so for either reason, what's most important about the teachings, whatever they may be, being impactful, is that you meet people where they are. And if somebody's got a lot of desire for a stronger relationship with their spouse, or if someone's in a lot of pain over a loss, or over the challenge with their child, or over the struggles with their team at work, or whatever it may be, doctors trying to be better at caregiving with their patients, that pain or that desire is the thing that's motivating them. And to have the most impact in the best way in the shortest time, I think you've got to be able to meet people where they are. And that's the big difference between, I'll say multiversity, but I'll say hopefully current day spirituality, by comparison to traditional religions, which just set up on the mountaintop and said, come here when you're ready. And that doesn't create the impact in the same way that I hope that we can, and others.
Certainly, just what you said. Basically, you got to get really unhappy, first of all, to even think that you're going to open yourself up to something that can make the change. And that seems to be, a common thread for everyone. And sometimes it's years, sometimes it's just like one moment. And then you start looking out. And you should write down what Jared just said, buffet of modalities. How about that? That's really poetic. I mean,
I like that.
You grab that one.
I like that.
So there's something that interested me in just reading through some of the stuff that I've been sent. And you talk about courage at one point, and you say one of the best descriptions that you've ever heard of regarding courage, it's not the absence of fear, it's being afraid and doing it anyway, which is... I like that definition, Scott, because courage, it's something that's been very important, that it's been brought up at the, I think we do retreats with Ram Dass and in Maui, and Krishna Das and Jack and Sharon and other people.
I want to go to one of those.
Yeah.
Come out. Open your heart in paradise on the beach. I mean, what do I have to sell it anymore?
I mean, how could that be bad, right?
Yeah, right. Anyhow, we talk about courage, and in particular, when we were in India, we were with Neem Karoli Baba. I think you know who that is. We call him Maharaji. And Krishna Das, in more than one of these retreats, has talked about courage in light of Maharaji one day saying to him, courage is very important. And I've told this story before, and I'll tell it again. And one of the Indian devotee who was next to him said, "No, it's bhakti." He didn't say bhakti yoga, but Guru's kripa, Guru's grace. So it's all based on that. So what? There's no need for being anything. And Maharaji just pointed his finger up like he used to do, and he looked at Krishnadas and he went, courage is everything, really slowly. And for the rest of his life, Krishnadas has remembered that in times of the most difficult situations. So courage, whenever I see that and see anybody address it, I always bring it up because I think it's a really important thing for people on many levels to help just get through day to day, never mind the big things in life. And certainly, so talk about it a little bit from your point of view. I mean, you did say the barriers in us in making a change is this wish that the path is going to present itself before you commit, and so on. Talk about it, Scott, because I think it's a good viewpoint that you have.
No, thank you. I'm glad to. It's one of my favorite subjects, actually. See, I think that this journey that we're on and ways of, let's call it just inquiry, discovery, betterment, the hard part is not describing what to do or why you should do it or how much better it would be if you did it. The hard part is how to do it. And so if we spent more time with ourselves, if we were willing to share more of ourselves with others and be more vulnerable and be more authentic and admit our fears and so forth, great. Love that. Sounds great. How do you do that? Right? And the how do you do it part is where the courage comes in. Because being authentic is easy if you're courageous about it, because it's what you are anyway. It's what we all are, right? And so it's not like, it's sometimes, it gets talked about as the mask. We all have a mask we put in front of us, and usually a mask behind that mask and so on. So what does it take to drop the mask? Showing your face is not hard, except for the courage to do it, right? And if we wait until we're not afraid to drop the mask, that's the whole reason the mask is there in the first place. And I'll say this too, because it's it's important to always ask the color of the lens anybody looks through. Most of what I've done, at least in the early years of my life, if I'm really honest about it, was driven by fear. It was fear of not knowing what it would be like if I didn't do it. It's a stupid bunch of double negatives, isn't it? But I've done that. I've reasoned to like that a lot. And afraid of how I'll be seen if I don't do this, or afraid of what people will say if I don't do that, or whatever. So, I've lived my life in the presence of a lot of fear. And so I might be biased about this, but I don't actually think it's possible to do something really challenging or authentic, I'll say, without being afraid of it. And so pretending otherwise doesn't help. So what do you do? And I think that's where courage is, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. And if you do, and I use this analogy a lot, it's like the high school dance. Everybody's on both sides of the gym looking across at one another. Nobody's dancing until somebody has the courage to walk across the dance floor and ask, and with the fear of being rejected in front of the whole student body, but they're not, and they dance. And of course, 5 minutes later, the dance floor is full because everybody wants to dance. So the thing about courage in the face of fear is, it's hard. And then just trying to remember I'm not alone. And if I'm willing and able, then I bet lots of other people will dance with me. But somebody's got to go first. Yeah. Right? In our own life, the only person that can go first is us. And so you can't wait around if it's you that you're waiting for. Exactly. And so anyway, all that leads to what I have a lot of strong feelings about courage being kind of the essential how-to pill in all this. And you just sometimes you just got to do it. Yeah.
Well, it's that you just got to do it. I think that it's a buffet of modalities. I just love that. I'm going to use it here because it's a buffet of different elements that make up the ability to be present enough and to be courageous, which includes includes grace, it includes effort, it includes a bit of trust, and that's something else that we've been talking about a lot. Our whole retreat that we did in December in Maui was around trust, and we're about to release an online course around trust. Actually, that's it's something we should talk about. Doing that kind of a thing at 1440 actually is get a themed thing going, and do something that's reflective of getting different people and different points of view, so we really do get that buffet going, because I love that idea. And of course that also represents multiversity.
Yeah, and that's a lot of when we do leadership training here, we're going to be doing it in a couple of months again. It's all about, that's what authenticity enables, is trust. Yeah. Because if I'm truly authentic and I'm showing up that way, then somebody's going to look and say, that's who that person really is, not who they're trying to make me think they are. And so now I'm willing to lean into that. Yeah. And so authenticity produces trust, and trust makes inspiration possible in the business setting, or for that matter, in a relationship. So there's being self-aware, then being able to be authentic about that and have the courage to show up creates a trusted environment. Trusted environments make inspiration and discovery possible. And that's what creates human flourishing. And so it's in the middle of the universe.
Yeah. And that's what also creates getting up out of your chair to walk across the gym. Yeah. Right. It's that little trust in the intuitive part of yourself. But we need you, Gagan, here to respond from your point of view in your, shall we say, less years on the planet, and your experience with trust and courage, because I want to hear about it.
Trust and courage. Gosh, I mean, I feel like Scott, speaking to me is like when I'm, Ram Dass is polishing the mirror. It's like, I mean, I'm looking at myself in the mirror, telling myself this, right? Yeah, it is the base. I mean, Raghu, I think I was talking to you offline about this, not in so many words, last week, about, hitting a certain point with my business.
It's just what I was thinking. Boy, we are really tuned in. That's great.
Yeah, in hitting with this creative agency, and kind of, there's as Ramdas or Krishna Das would say, all under the blanket. It's Maharaji's, all under Maharaji's blanket, as we flow, and to try to release attachment to some outcome that, as you said, Scott, I've got a desire to achieve, and that takes trust, and it takes kind of surrender to that, faith. And I had a moment. I was in India, in Varanasi, Benares, in October, and there, where the city of Varanasi meets the Ganga, and this, where they have the burning ghats, basically one of the holiest cities in India. And where they've talk about confronting attachment and desire to things on this planet. There's nothing like sitting there for 4 hours and watching a human body burn, and meditating on that subject, and thinking about all the things that happen in my day-to-day that pull me, and there's a realization that happened in that moment, when I was in Varanasi, that everything is perfect, that I needed to release attachment and that desire, and just kind of go down the river where the river wants to, take me. And then I flew back to America, and I spend a week in my office with my team, which is lovely. And, and you start getting pulled back into clients and this management thing, and how quickly that experience can kind of fade a little bit towards the background, and that attachment, that desire that, has been trained into this, spacesuit that I've been wearing for the past 36 years, comes about, and it's a real struggle, that struggle, but that's why, I guess, coming back to, the practice, I guess, and coming back to, sadhana and these different modalities, whether it's through an experience there at Multiversity, or through a podcast, or a talk here on Be Here Now Network, or whatever it is that I can remember. It was hearing you say what you just said that brought me back to sitting in front of the fire at the burning ghat at the Ganga, and realizing the stress I'd been in for the last few days at my work, and the tension and juxtaposition in that. So thank you for bringing me back to that.
Yeah, well, you're more than welcome. I think I'll just speak for myself with practice, and it's such a good point, Jared. Is, for me, I think a lot of times the benefit of my practice isn't actually what happens on any given minute or time on the cushion. It's the discipline of doing it. It's just the discipline of checking back in with it, and sometimes it doesn't even register. Sometimes my mind goes crazy the whole time on the cushion, like maybe all of us, I guess. But somehow the rigor and the regular return to that, even if it doesn't show up on that, that block of time there, that half hour, whatever it is, sometime during the day or sometime else, it's like it keeps it in the forefront of our minds. You've got that experience of sitting there in India at the forefront of your mind, and then it gets triggered. I think that's why practice is so valuable. It's the discipline of it, and the reminder that it brings.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I would say also to, I want to answer something, Raghu. I didn't particularly answer you on just the next generation's thinking in this kind of space. And I just want to answer with one little piece, which is what I'm seeing as I'm hiring and working with these various companies and startups here, is purpose has really been, at the forefront and integrated into the next generation in a way that I don't think it was in, like, before even Gen X. Like there was kind of this ambition and this way that I guess was trained into moving through life. And I would just say that what I'm seeing, at least, is when it comes to trust and courage, I'm seeing some of these younger generations, I mean, mine included, but even, towards millennials and Gen Y and Gen Z and whoever knows what the next one's going to be, Gen AA, is going to be, are willing to trust that purpose is going to bring about the kind of lasting happiness and fulfillment, without being so tugged by some of the ambition to grab at kind of things and attachment to that. I really do think there's like a reinvigorated trust that and courage to lean into purpose within like your daily work and things like that. And I'm seeing that manifest here.
Yeah, that's what I would call it. There's a very healthy curiosity. And it's not waiting for people to become 40 years old or 50 years old and ask questions about meaning and purpose in life. People are asking that question in school, and they've got a need to know and a willingness to demand answers that they believe in, not just that are told to them by somebody older than them. And that's thrilling to me.
Openness, big time openness. Scott, I'll tell you a story. It hopefully won't embarrass Gagan, Jared here. One thing we haven't talked about in this whole conversation, inner awakening, has been sort of our theme. Love, unconditional love. And so here's my story. I went to India, and I went with Jared and his wife, Jyoti, and we were up in the Himalayas at my guru's ashram and having a wonderful time. And then I said, I'm going down to the middle of the country to a jungle to meet this yogi. Maybe you want to come. And they said, sure, because they're really adventurous. So off we went. And at this point, we knew each other. Not the way that we know each other now. So that, I didn't. When you're in the presence of beings that are free in some way, you get to know the person that you're with in front of that mirror, shall we say, a lot better. So we went down there, and he, in an instant, I met this being, and I went, oh yeah. Somehow I know you somehow, and I felt an immediate affinity. And realized he was the real thing, and then Jared jumped into this love puddle, shall we call it, in an instant. Was wide open. There was nothing between him and his mind. He took his mind out. He put it on on a rock, and that was the end of that for the 3 or 4 days that we were there in that moment. And I've had that experience with a number of people that I've that I've been with, and I've either said, come with me in India or something. We happen to meet up, or going to Maui, and where we have these fairly large groups over a week period. That is, to me, the most optimistic experience that I've had in the last number of years. When we talk about, and specifically about next generation, and kids that are coming into it and coming into their 20s and then 30s and so on, that is so welcoming, thinking of what we really need going forward, and that's got to be an element of it all, that openness and recognizing that love that's inside all of us. So I just.
Yeah, I think if I could have one wish for love, it would be that we could think of it as a verb. It's a thing that we do, and sometimes I think this notion of being in love makes it seem like it's a place or a thing, and to me, it's not. It's an action that we take. And it's got all the hope to create all of the potential inside all of us, because it's what makes possible what might be more difficult than we can do all by ourselves. And it doesn't mean somebody has to love us. It could be us loving someone else. It could be us loving the nature and the redwood trees around us here in Multiversity. Manifests in a lot of ways, but it's probably, right up there with courage. I would call it the other great answer to the question of how. How do you do that? How do you do that? Courage and love are a couple of great verbs, actions, commitments that make possible, near as I can tell, just about anything that we're capable of.
Yeah, and when I always qualify when we speak of love, we're talking about not the business love. You love me, I'll love you back. Not that one. This is unconditional and no judgment whatsoever. Yeah, so courage and love, that's going to be our next retreat. We should hold it at Multiverse at 1440, Scott.
Consider it an open invitation.
All right. We'll put it together. I'm not kidding. I think it's a great idea, actually.
Absolutely.
I do too. I'm not kidding either. I think it's the starting point and it's the starting point, it's the middle, and it's the end.
Yeah.
So you could check it at the beginning, we'll do a whole bunch of work and come back in circle at the end in gratitude for the same thing we started with. And I'm sure that there'd be a lot to learn for me.
Yeah. Yeah, as they say in India, very good idea, very good. Thank you so much for being here, Scott. It was great meeting you.
Likewise, Raghu and Jared both. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and everybody out there, we're going to have up on BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling, we're going to have the... well, what am I talking about? 1440 is all over the site, okay? Easy for you to check it out and see who's coming up there. And certainly if you're in the neighborhood on the West Coast or plan to just go there directly, you'll see you'll see the buffet of modalities.
The buffet of modalities
Levy
is now here
here
from now on.
Yes. And thank you, Gagan. Thanks for being here with me. I love having you as my partner here. And again, thanks, Scott. And everybody, we'll see you next week on Be Here Now Network. And have a good one.